Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is loom, and this verb was suggested by the viewer Luis. And I just want you to know how grateful I am for this suggestion. Now, let's begin our discussion by looking at some of the ways that we can use the verb loom. The first definition of this verb is to appear as a vague or shadowy form, especially one that is large or threatening. With this first definition, you might encounter it more in literature. So, as people are telling a particular story and having some kind of ominous or maybe even a little sort of scary figure that just kind of appears sometimes out of nowhere. A second way you might encounter the verb loom means to appear in the mind in a magnified or threatening form. So, while in number one, we could kind of picture or visualize that vague or shadowy figure, now it's more of a mental thing in the second definition. But look at what it has in common, that idea of it being threatening. A third way you can use the verb loom means to seem about to happen. So, if you think of something kind of close to happening, maybe you've heard something is looming, right? What's again special about this is that this isn't a good event, right? We wouldn't talk about a positive or exciting thing, right? This usually has more of a negative meaning. So we're back to something that's ominous or something that is threatening. For now, you should know that loom is a regular verb. If you want to make the progressive form of this verb, all you need to do is add ing, and that forms looming. The past tense and the participle form of this verb can be made by adding ed. Our base verb, loom, ends in a voiced m sound. This means our ed ending is just going to make a d sound, and we're not going to add an extra syllable as we say it. So the past tense and the participle form of our verb should sound like this: loomed, loomed. Now, there are a few phrasal verbs that you might encounter. You'll notice here their definitions are a bit similar, but I always like to share some more examples. So, the first phrasal verb you might encounter is to loom out of. This can again go back to that first definition, for something to be or to become visible. Here, though, it might be piercing or penetrating, something that's thick, or something that is blanketing or covering. Okay, so an example of this might be: this mountain looms out of the mist at dawn. Okay, so what it's beginning to describe here in this sentence, right, is that something becomes visible just as the sun is coming up. Okay. A second phrasal verb we might encounter is to loom up. This can be used a few different ways. One, again, is that idea of something becoming visible, like it's sort of rising up from some point or a source. So, an example of this: something loomed up from the shadows of the forest, and the children ran back home. So again, this tends to have that kind of like, ooh, scary feeling to this particular verb. So the sentence there might be part of a story, something that's a bit of a mystery, or other scary type of story. A second way to use loom up can mean to become nearing in time. And generally, again, this isn't a thing you're excited to do, so it tends to cause dread, or it tends to cause anxiety as a state of really extreme worry. An example of this is the deadline looming up, right? So becoming near. A third way to use loom up means to become more definite or probable, typically in a threatening way. So, again, This has a pretty negative meaning. So, an example of that. A shutdown is looming up and the two sides aren't negotiating. So here, maybe we're talking about a company and a labor union. Sometimes this occurs with the government here in the United States and in other countries as well, where political leaders are responsible for creating bills, laws, and funding our government. But sometimes, right, that process stops. So here, uh, we're talking about kind of some type of either business or government shutdown becoming more likely. Now, let's continue using our verb of the day in a couple different verb tenses. Today, we'll practice the past progressive or past continuous, and then we'll work on the simple future. Let's start with the past progressive. We use this verb tense to describe an action that was ongoing or one that was continuing during a period of time in the past. As you may have heard me say, sometimes teachers or textbooks will call this the past continuous. It's just fine, means exactly the same thing as past progressive. The reason I use past progressive is the two P's to sometimes help my students remember they're going to need two parts to make their verb. So let's talk about our structure. In the affirmative, and actually with all affirmative, negative, or yes or no questions here, we must pay attention to our subject. In the affirmative, if our subject is I, he, she, or it, we'll use was and then the ing form of the verb. But if our subject is you, we, or they, will use were. Okay, so we're taking the past tense form of be, was or were, and then we'll have that ing ending. So let's take a look at our affirmative example. The team knew a brutal final stretch was looming all season, but they still looked unprepared. Again, I always look for relevant, current examples of verbs, and I encountered that while I was reading this week. So someone was criticizing a particular sports team. Uh, they had some really challenging opponents their last 3 or 4 games of the season, right? So that's kind of that idea. It's brutal, it's threatening, it's going to be difficult. And this particular writer was still very critical of how they performed. Now let's talk about making negative past progressive sentences. To do this, again, pay attention to your subject. You'll use either was or were, whichever matches your subject. Then use not before the verb with the ing ending. Let's take a look at another example. Price increases weren't looming, but consumers were reluctant to spend on luxury goods. So again, we've got our sort of ongoing action here or lack of an action. This was referring to a specific time in the past where market indicators were largely positive. However, people felt like the economy wasn't so strong and their behavior reflected that. Now let's take a look at making a yes or no question in the past progressive. To do this, start with was or were, then you're going to have your subject, and then you'll use the verb with an ing ending. Here's one more example. Was the draft looming when he made the decision to go abroad? So that word might be new for some people. At various points in our history here in the United States, there have been times where the government has said able bodied men, generally 18 to I think around 40 or so, can be forced to serve in the military. And there was a particular time in the 1960s and 70s where many people did not want to fight. They didn't believe in the war, or it felt like it went against their personal principles. And so one way to try and avoid that requirement was to leave the country. So here we're trying to understand, was that an ongoing sort of threat? Now let's talk about making some sentences in the simple future. Today, we're going to focus on sentences with will. And the nice thing about making sentences with will is that our structure is going to stay the same no matter what our subject is. So, what you're going to notice here is a subject, will, and then a base verb in the affirmative. And people will use this structure many times to make predictions. They might use it to make offers and promises, and occasionally people will also use it to describe their plans. Let's take a look at an example sentence. The shadow of ISIS will loom over the Trump presidency. So, this was one particular writer's prediction based on the terror attack that occurred on uh, in the first few hours of 2025 in New Orleans, as well as other events occurring worldwide. And I think based on intelligence, someone was making this particular prediction in the last few days. Now let's talk about making a negative simple future sentence. To do this with will, we again start with our subject. We'll use will not and then the base verb. You'll also encounter people using the contraction for will not. It's won't, W-O-N apostrophe T. You can see that in the example. Winter storms won't loom over our area this weekend. This sentence is something I heard a meteorologist say in the last week or so, as many people were preparing for a strong winter storm. This person was trying to make a prediction, if some might say like a promise, right? We don't have this threat in our area. Finally, let's talk about making a yes or no question in the simple future with will. To do this, you're going to start with will, then you're going to have your subject, and then the base verb. You can see that in my last example. Will this project loom over us all year? So here, someone is kind of wanting to know, is this ever going to end? Is it, might feel like sort of a threatening presence, threatening to one's time or maybe one's health because it requires so much work. Now we're going to move on and talk about some words and a phrase related to our verb of the day, loom. And the first word we'll discuss today is the noun form of this word. The noun loom has the exact same spelling and the exact same pronunciation as our verb. It also has a couple different meanings. One way to use it is to talk about maybe a vague first appearance of some object that's either seen in the darkness, maybe seen at fog, and we'll also hear this used in connection with people who are out at sea and sort of whatever object, maybe it's land, coming into view. That's actually my example sentence here. Shortly afterwards, the loom of the land was seen, and the captain gave new orders. So here, kind of like land is appearing out of the darkness, or maybe out of some fog here, and now the story is going to continue to tell us what needed to change or what needed to happen as a result of this. Now, another way you might encounter this noun is if you are into weaving. So, this word, Loom, can also be an apparatus or tool for making fabric, where you're taking yarn or thread. So, to help us kind of understand what I mean by that, I've got a picture at the bottom in the bottom right hand corner of the screen. You can see a person's hands there using and manipulating to weave or put together some type of material. This is something actually my mother-in-law does quite often, and she teaches other people as well. So, And sort of connected to that, her loom has been passed down to her and she treasures it. So I believe it came from a great aunt that she loved dearly, and now she has this particular apparatus in her home, and she uses it to make a lot of rugs and other garments as well. Now, another word we might encounter is the adjective looming. Okay. Many times when we use this adjective, we're describing something that seems about to happen. And again, this thing that's about to happen, it's not a great thing, right? It's something that causes worry, something that makes you, that feels, again, a bit threatening. An example of that. The looming tariffs have many international businesses worried. So, again, back to this idea of politics. In some of our examples here, we have a new president who has made threats, some would say, that there are going to be high tariffs on goods coming into the United States. So, that's one reason we might see that adjective being used in that particular way. A second way the adjective looming can be used is to describe something that is appearing as a vague or shadowy form. And again, that might be something that's a bit large, or more commonly, something that's threatening. An example of this, a looming figure appeared in the distance. What was it? Right? So again, we might encounter more of that kind of language in literature or storytelling. One last phrase or idiom here for us to discuss today. You might encounter a description of something looming large or to loom large. Generally, when that gets used, we're talking about something having great importance or great influence. Let's take a look at an example of that. Dramatic budget cuts will loom large at the next school board meeting. So, this particular topic is going to have great importance and maybe influence on what gets discussed or what programs get implemented in that particular meeting and in future ones. Again, I want to say a special thank you to Luis for suggesting today's verb. I thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a great day.